Good. Okay. Well, I'd like to call this meeting of the Manzanita City Council to order at 12:02 on March the 12th. We've got basically three agenda items for today, which should be all time well spent, good and useful discussions. The first thing we have is the wayfaring plan. This one we've talked about a ways ago now, and at least in my mind, it kind of went to the dark recesses of my memory. So Nan's here to bring it back to the forefront to all of us, and she'll talk about what that plan is, remind us of the work that's been done, and let us see what is ahead for us as a council in the city in that area. So that'll be the first thing. We'll come back to our ongoing work on short-term rentals and have some further discussion. Since we spent a great deal of time on this in our last workshop, I'm not expecting to rehash everything, but what we'll do is go through the salient points and decisions and then see what other information or discussion counselors want to have as we get to our next step on the path with that. I think Layla also has some information on revenue, possible revenue impacts. So we'll take that in and have some discussion about that as well. And then the last thing, which should be pretty brief, is I'd like to, while we're all together, just come back together and affirm the work that we did in our council goal setting session, which seems like months ago now to me, but I think it's only been about a month since we did that. And so let's make sure we're clear on the major goals that'll be stated on that. That'll be helpful for Layla and staff as we get further into the budget cycle, which of course has already begun. So that's the business for today, and I welcome everybody to join us for that and listen. I will say for anybody who may not be aware, we do not take comment. This is not a work session for public comment. It's a session for counselors to work together and spend more time on a topic than we are typically able to do in a regular council meeting where there is much business to be done. So we've got a few topics today. And was there anything, Layla, you wanted to do in the way of introducing Nan? Or
The
anything?
one needs no introduction.
Yeah,
Yeah, other than to say, yeah, Nan's been working with us for quite a while, so thanks for your patience on the wayfinding plan. And actually, our logo was part of that. So TCVA helped fund the design of that work. And I know that today we're hoping to get sort of a little further down the path with some of the wayfinding because TCVA will be able to help actually build and construct and install those signs. So I think with that, I will hand it over to you, Nan.
Here. Okay. Hello, everyone. And yes, we did start on this probably, what was it? Maybe late 2023, early 2024. We have put a plan together. And just as a quick history of the wayfinding, the very, very first county commissioners meeting that I attended was the first week I worked, December of 2014. And they asked me um, what my goals were. And I said, it's probably more important for you to tell me what your number one goal is, and then we'll work from there. And they all said, the commissioners at the time, we want wayfinding throughout the whole county, and that the TLT that they collect would be paying for it. It took a couple, 3, 4 years to get some money to do that, but we did get some planning done, and we now have about, I think we're on our ninth and 10th community. Right now, we're getting very close to wrapping up this big project, other than one-off signs around.
Mhm.
So for Manzanita, as Layla said, it is the very first phase of it was getting a new logo, and I love the logo. I think it looks great, and especially as you lightened it, I think it's a much better fit than the darker colors that were there before. So there was a survey done, and Mayor, when you and I spoke about the gateway sign, I misread the survey. I didn't remember it right because it'd been a few months since I read it. But one of the questions in the survey was, do you support replacing the gateway sign with a replica of the current sign? Meaning make a new sign that looks pretty much the same, but with more durable materials and a more substantial base for safety and longevity. 200 people answered that question, and yet 68% said yes, keep the sign, make it more durable. And 32% said, no, I want something different. So it was hands down 2-1 to keep the gateway sign that's up in front.
And one way you can help us, Nan, is to remember that we are not all wayfaring, wayfinding experts. So even the language you're using so far, that's our main city sign at
Yes,
the head of Lanita with the
yes,
beloved seagulls. That
yes.
I believe those are seagulls. I'm not always good in my marine wildlife, but yeah. So that's what you're referring to.
Yes.
Yeah, and just so there's no mystery about it, I had called Nan because I was a bit apologizing in advance because I was very dim in my memory of the work that we council may have done on this. So I was warning her, at least from my perspective, she may kind of have to start back at the beginning again, and that may be true for other counselors, but if it is, I'm taking the hit for all of us. 'Cause I just felt like we were starting again. Yeah, so that's our main sign, and that's just one element of the work that we're talking about. And I'm not shy about asking about what words mean. If there's specialty areas I don't know about it, but if you could just keep that in mind, Nan, and make sure we're clear on what you're referring to with the signs, that'll be great.
Okay, yeah. I get used to using lingo, I guess.
We
Uh,
all do. We all do.
so
Yeah.
so really a gateway sign is the entry sign, and it's that beautiful, the one that's everybody loves. It's the beige sign with the seagulls on it, and it's right at Lanita as you're going by, and you can see it from both entries from 101, whether north or south. You can see the Manzanita sign there. There are other couple signs too. So directionals point people in the right direction. And there aren't any actually, except for one, I think, in Manzanita now, and it's older and it points to things that aren't there anymore or won't be there very soon. And it's up by Manzanita Espresso and the police station. It's right on the corner there of Lanita. And then there are signs that we call interpretives, and those are storytelling signs. And they're usually set either as an individual sign on a pedestal that's at reading level, like that, and angled, or they're mounted into a kiosk, and 3 or 4 sided kiosk, and that is a structure, very tall structure, and it'll have the signs in a kiosk are usually about 3 feet 7 inches high and about a little over 2 feet wide. But you can get in a story, pictures, illustrations, and those stories are the things that people feel are important to share about Manzanita. And it can be safety, it can be wildlife, it can be behavioral stuff, it can be history. So there's a lot that you can do with those interpretive signs. And we've seen native history told, um, what's a riptide look like, what to do, rocks and shells and bird, mammals and wildlife and birds. It can be whatever the community wants. And I think there was some um, in the plan that was mentioned in meetings and surveys about what the stories would like. But if if you want to we can go through this really quickly. If Layla can bring up the map and I can explain what each of these numbers represent.
Great. And while she's doing that, I think Counselor Tom has a question.
Hi, Nan.
Hi.
So the second kind of sign that you were talking about, the one that you said is at the corner of Lanita and Fourth.
Yeah.
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 So what about the sign that's at the corner of Lanita and Carmel that points to the golf course? Would that fall in the category also?
Yes, as a directional.
as
Yes.
direction?
Yeah. And
Okay.
there's some ideas too about expanding that message. So,
Okay, and so then the next kind of sign that you're talking about, would that be like the signs that are down in Nehalem, down at the dock, and up at
yes.
NCR? So
Yeah,
those are examples of what you're going to be talking about now.
that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, and we're about to update one of the signs in Nehalem because it was, and I advised against this, but at the time they wanted a map with all the shops listed on it. But of
Oh,
course, half that map changed. So it's better to do like a brochure, which we are working on, a brochure for something like that, because the signs can be expensive and to replace them, you know, it's it's more affordable to do a brochure. So, okay. I hope everybody can see this. Maybe yeah, I think you can see it. All right. So see where that green number 1 is. That's the entry sign or the gateway sign. The partners in design who did this plan suggested doing a gateway sign with the new logo. But it's not necessary. I think the county or not the county, but the city residents have expressed their desire to keep this the same. We can just do it in materials that are more sustainable. So if you're going down the street here, so number 12 is on Highway 101, and it is to direct people with RVs and campers to go down the Kearney City Road instead and take that toward Nehalem Bay State Park. And the purpose for that is just to keep RVs and campers out of the main street. They take up a lot of room, and that's the purpose of that. And that one that's along on Highway 101 that says number 11 there in the right-hand side, that will also direct them down. But there is already a sign there that says to Nehalem Bay State Park. So number 11 might not be needed. We can go on down the street then. And number 11 too is directing people along Classic with their RV. Is that number 13? I'm looking at this over here. Hold on. Yeah, number 13. I'm not sure that is the best either because taking an RV down Classic and over to Nacarney, uh, nobody's probably going to be able to pass them. So I would recommend we not do 13. Number 1 is directing people to the new city hall and police station and farmers market. Number 2 is directing people to public parking, restrooms, and the bus stop right there where by Manzanita Espresso. And the other pointing west, it would be a west arrow would be to the visitor center and to the historical society.
Yay.
Number 2, excuse me, where are we here? God, let me look at this. Number 3, farther down the street there, is additional parking that is behind the post office. And heading west again would be the Visitor Center, Historical Society, and bike trail.
what's the bike trail?
That's down there that leads to the golf course.
Oh, okay.
There's a
Got it.
bike down there.
Yeah, on Carmel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then we'll go back up here around the corner a bit. So number 4 is additional parking. That's from the other street as you're coming off Dorcas And so there would be public parking, the post office, and then also directions to the city park, golf links, and the recycling center. So taking them back to the recycling center, up over to Classic and over to Nacarni. Number 5 is additional parking, city park, public golf links. That's pointing west, pointing east, recycling center, Nehalem Bay State Park, and north is downtown restrooms, farmers market. Number 6, let me see where we are there. Number 6 is pointing to the recycling center and Nehalem State Park, also to Highway 101, Visitor Center, Farmers Market, and also restrooms heading west, restrooms, parking, bus stop, and visitor center. So on 6 is at Classic and Dorcas, and there is not a sign there that goes to pointing to recycling or to 101 or Nehalem Bay State Park. So that would take them over to number 10, and that's where another sign leads them to the recycling center and the park. And let me see here. We already did we're doing number 7 now. And number 7 is directing to the golf course, bike trail, and Nehalem State Park. And going west would be visitor center and restrooms. Now that one will be very close to the visitor center. So I'm not sure we actually need to direct people at number 7 to the visitor center, but definitely to the restrooms. Number 8 is just farther down the road, and that is to City Park, public golf links, Nehalem Bay State Park, and to downtown. So that would be from people that were coming from the park and heading over to the town. And so that would direct them there. Number 9 is also City Park and golf links and Nehalem Bay State Park, restrooms and visitor center. That's another one that I'm not quite sure. Maybe that's redundant. That's only a short block apart, so I'm not sure that would be needed. Let me see here. I think I got all those. And then let me get my other ones here. So the blue number 1, the visitor center, that's where a 3-sided kiosk that has interpretive signage would go. And some of the topics here are beach safety, indigenous story, the original building and founder story of Ben Lane. Those are just suggested. The number 2 blue dot is Sunset Beach with a 4-sided kiosk. And that is shipwrecks, beeswax, Neoconi Mountain, and wildlife. And number 3, now this one's a little controversial. Number 3 is in front of the Pine Grove Community Center along that railing. And that is a great place if you want to do history stories. So I know that they have a brochure, they have a glass front brochure holder there or flyers and stuff. And I know that they worked hard to get that. This would be below that and along the railing. So some of these are, I think really well thought out, and there are others that could be redundant. There was a lot of signs that direct to the visitor center, which is an important center. We may not need quite as many, but that's what we've got so far.
So what kind of feedback or discussion or something else are you looking for from this group today, Nan?
Well, any suggestions? Did we leave anything out? Um, is it, will this work for the town? Is this something that you want and you want will work? I really like being directed places when especially when you're new to a town. Um, and even though the town is mostly just one main street and you will discover things as you go, I think finding things like the city hall, the police department, the additional parking, and telling the story of the town and the things that you care about is what's really important.
So maybe we could just open up for a beginning for counselors each to give some feedback on what they've seen. I'm not surprised that Tom's hands up because I know he's going to have a few things to say. I'm just guessing perhaps about the history, but maybe a few other things as well. So why don't we do a little bit of a round robin and just give Nan some feedback as a starter on this, and then we'll see. We'll see. I think, part of the feedback that would be useful would be, I mean, I don't think we're going to sit here in a council meeting and have us decide what's redundant and what's not. I think maybe what would be useful to Nan and the project would be to give some sense of where we think the priorities should be for signage for the community. And then we can start with that and see where it takes us. So Tom, why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Okay, so Nan, you're recommending not to place sign number 13. And I'm kind of curious on that one because it seems to me that a lot of people with their RVs, they don't necessarily enter town on Lanita. And a lot of times, especially if they've been here before, come into town on Manzanita and go straight to the grocery store. And so directing them across to Classic to get to the park would keep them off of Lanita, off of Carmel. And I think that, maybe that sign number 13 would be a good thing. And that's my 2 cents on that.
Oh, okay. So a yes on 13. Okay.
That's my feeling. There's other counselors in the room, but that's
Okay.
my the and then your interpretive sign number 3. I don't know how much communication you've had with Pine Grove about that, but I know they're really, really attached to the display board that they put up on the railing.
Yeah.
And for years, certain members of the NVHS board have been really interested to see if we couldn't populate the side of the building as you walk down the sidewalk to the entrance to the Historical Society with stuff about local history. And that might be a way to get Pine Grove on board with the idea of this type of decoration without tampering with their new toy.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Good idea.
Thanks.
Brad, what thoughts have you got?
So the number 3 sign at the Pine Grove would be in addition to what Pine Grove has there now. So this will be a new sign.
In addition, uh-huh.
The other feedback that's similar to Tom, I like the idea of having 13 there on Manzanita, but would almost suggest we direct folks back to the 101 to Nacarny instead of going down Classic. So if they've stopped off there at the grocery store, just hop back on the 101 to get to the park would be my suggestion.
Okay.
And then I noticed on the map that Layla pulled up for us, I think there was at least 3 stars with question marks. Were those proposed or
Oh,
question?
yes, this one marks with stars are possibly additional signage, and that would be up to the town, what they would like there.
But
If they would like something there. And I would also say the number 2 in the green circle, which I forgot to mention, is for the next.
Sorry, Nan, could we bring that map back up while we're discussing this? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, down by the Manzanita City Park, there's a number 2 there, and that is a new sign for the city park. And that might be where you'd want to put a logo, your new logo.
Yeah, especially since we're doing some refurbishment work and we'll likely be making some more improvements to the park over time. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
Jerry,
That could
sorry.
also be another interpretive sign, if you'd like.
Brad, did you have some more you wanted to say?
I did not. Generally, I like the plan and think all of your suggestions so far are good ideas.
Jerry, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, when I'm visiting a new place, I am a big fan of signage and I rely on it heavily. And sometimes it frustrates you and disappoints you because they start you off on a trek and then they kind of drop you. So
Yeah.
I don't think we have too much risk of that here in Manzanita. We're kind of small, but rather than me sort of picking apart individual decisions you've made, I'm just curious, how do you sort of get the input of the unknown visitor? How is it going to work for them? Is there a method to make sure that these locations and these topics on the sign are pertinent to the folks that actually are going to rely on them?
Well, the good thing is that our designers, who have done work with most of our towns, were new to Manzanita. They had not been to Manzanita, so they were told, like, where are we? Where are we going? What's down here? And so we kind of answered their questions. And they've been doing this for like 30 years in design. So I appreciate their viewpoint, and having them be new to the town was also actually added a bonus, I think, to this planning.
Okay. The only other comment I would make is that I do think we have heard from the community, or several in the community, that whatever we can do to get the larger trucks and RVs and rigs heading to the park off our city streets, we should try to do that. So I'm sort of hoping that we can encourage people to use that entrance down near the gas station. That's no picnic from there to the state park. I mean, the Kearney Road's a tough
Yeah.
run. But we do have trucks in and out of town as it is, delivering things on Lanita and construction vehicles, et cetera. So, the RVs they can be pretty big and take away the enjoyment of the roadways while they're making their way through town. So if we can steer them towards a gas station, I think that'd be great.
Good.
Anything else, Jerry?
No, I appreciate the effort and the work that went into it. As Nan was talking it through, I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is fascinating that we have all these places that need signage, because for those of us who live here and enjoy walking around on a regular basis, it seems like a pretty simple place. But obviously we have people from all over visiting here, and as long as their needs are being attended to, I think that makes the whole project worthwhile.
So,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Nan.
I was just going to say too, the county commissioners asked me to go through 10 years of community planning sessions, and there were about 11 of them over the last 10 years, including the ones that we did with community planning in Manzanita. And one of the things that came up in Manzanita Community Planning was to have a walkway along Ocean Road, which is a county road, and to do some more like signage, safety signage perhaps down at the Neoconi Beach access down there. And so I made that as a priority project with the county to invest their TLT in making that happen. When that'll happen, I don't know. But I just wanted to add that too, because we thought about including it down there in the Neocon, like more signage down there, but that would be part of county property, so we can work with them.
Good. Well, I wanted to share a few thoughts I'd had. So I think the basic principle of pointing people to public amenities, particularly restrooms and parking, is great. So we've got that covered. I would concur with a few counselors who've already spoken about the routing of large vehicles. So anything in any of the signage anywhere that can be done to indicate that it's the nice, neighborly, good citizenly thing to do to get on the 101 with your vehicle to get to the park. And then
Okay.
we're happy to see you on foot in smaller vehicles. If you must, take the trailer, then that's okay. But just, whatever in any way we can do to encourage the big stuff to stay on the highway as opposed to the local streets, that would be great. I do have a bias about public safety in this. So when we get to the point of like what would be at the visitor center in particular, when you're just about ready to get onto the beach or when you actually are onto the beach, any and every message we can give for the person who's not familiar with our ocean beaches would be, I think, the priority for us. I love the history and I love the Native American history. I love all those aspects of it. And if we can do more than safety, that's great. But I think first and foremost, the messaging should be around how to keep your eyes open, and the do's and don'ts of being on the Pacific Ocean on a beach.
Right.
So,
Good.
and I think the community would be very supportive of that. I mean, that's just something we all go through watching visitors and trying to figure out if we're going to help people understand not to get on a log, whether we may be well received with our advice or not. It's just part of living here and understanding how where the risks are when you're there. So yeah, I leave it to somebody with more experience than me to figure out if something's redundant or not. I'm not going to weigh in on any of that, but those would be the two, I guess the three main things: the keeping the large vehicles off the smaller roads as much as we can, public safety, particularly as it relates to the beach, and then the amenities that people are looking for. I'd be pleased to see the additional information for people to get to the recycling center. That'd be great. I think, would we be replacing or keeping still the sign that's on, that road changes names so many times, I can't. Yeah, the existing one that tells you to turn left and go along the park to get to the recycling center. That's been there a long time.
It has, and I can talk to the recycling center. That's still a city street right there, right? Where the recycling center, where you turn?
I'm never 100% sure on that street. I'll leave it to someone else.
Well, if it's inside the purple, it's a city street, except for Kearney City Road. All of it is county road and part of Ocean Road. So I think it just depends on what side of the street it's on.
Okay.
And I
Well,
can't
listen,
remember.
I can also talk to the recycling, the waste management group and see if they'd like a new sign, because it'd be nice to have it match.
Nan, is there anything in here that gives us kind of a look and feel of what these things would look like without necessarily having all the content on them?
Yes, there is. The plan, I think I sent it to Layla. There's a whole plan, and I can send it to everybody that shows what they would look like.
I can pull it up really quick. We just wasn't rebranded, so we didn't put it out. But give me 1 second, I can pull it up. Can I just stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can monkey
Sure.
around? Okay, thanks.
I think, Nan, one thing that's nice about being towards the end of this path you've been on for some years now is we can get the feel and see of what this looks like in the communities around us. So all of us are in and out of the other communities. So the style and the type of the things that are similar but unique to the towns in terms of the signs, right, to tell you, hey, you're now in Nehalem, you're in Wheeler. We have a feel for what that looks like, and we know we'll be different. And I think there are many times Manzanita does not mind being different about some things. So
Yeah, and that is one thing that I've really liked about all this planning. There's elements that are consistent with every signage and every town, but each town gets their own flavor. So a lot of the bases, the types of materials that are used, but are often the same, but they have their own unique personality for each town.
and with the materials that you are choosing and putting in, what's the life expectancy for them?
At minimum 20 years.
Okay, and there's an expectation of upkeep that falls to the city once they're installed?
Well, the city will have to insure them, include them in their insurance, and we'll have a full documentation of that. If somebody damages something like runs a truck into a sign, which has happened twice,
Mhm.
we replace it the first time. So, but and it's less expensive to replace it than it is to build it the very first time because the sign maker, fabricator, and installer, they already have the plans ready. So
Thank you.
What's the cost of this project?
a lot.
A lot.
This one will probably be close to 250,000 in that neighborhood.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it's Ramsey, we use Ramsey signs. And they guarantee their work, of course. We have used one other sign maker, and it was the very first project. It was for Tillamook, town of Tillamook, to put up their big gateway signs, and they did not use the correct finishing and for the wood on the signs, and the finish faded very quickly. So they fixed that. And then they also did Wheeler's two entry signs. And Wheeler wanted a little bit different. They wanted blue metal posts on the bottom. And they did, but they got it and they're happy with it.
Is this already budgeted for, Layla?
Yes, uh-huh.
This is Nan's budget. Yes.
Yes,
My
yeah.
budget. Yeah.
So budgeting for this comes out of Tillamook, your budget, Nan, the Tillamook County Visitors Association.
Yes.
Your
Uh-huh.
money you've been allocated, and you've been coordinating with the county on this for years now.
Yeah.
So the upfront cost, all the design work that you guys have done, the branding work as well, has been paid for out of those funds. So what
Yes.
we're really talking about then is installation is included, I'm assuming, as well.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, so they'll be up and running, and then it's turned over to us to maintain them. And if there's something unusual that happens with something getting wiped out, you can help us out with the first one. But then
Yeah.
it's our asset and our responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's good to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, we've had, gosh, let's see who all had these done. It's like, Nehalem, I'll just go down the road. Nehalem, Wheeler, Garibaldi has not yet, but will. Rockaway had multiple signs done, including a digital sign. And I'm not sure if that's something that you would want for any reason. And perhaps in front of the city hall, you might want a digital sign, small, not small, but enough for people to see. And that might be a little taller, and that would tell the public when you have meetings or a special event or something at City Hall. Rockaway loves theirs. We did Bay City when we're doing more of Tillamook's directional signs. We've done Cape Mears has a new entry sign, and they're getting an interpretive sign and a safety kiosk. And we're working with Neatarts in Oceanside right now. And Pacific City has about half their signage right now.
So I think, Layla, do you have comments or anything that you'd want to make sure is added that counselors haven't suggested or said so far?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think I wanted to build on what you had suggested regarding like king tides and sneaker waves, which is also fire safety.
Yeah,
And fireworks. So that's something that comes up for us quite a lot. So some information perhaps on one at the beach kiosks or one at the visitor center that just talks about fire safety with campfires or bonfires on the beach. And then I'm just reminding folks that it's illegal to put fireworks out on the beach. I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, we can do that. There's several of the towns have requested that. So good.
Brad?
You mentioned a electronic reader board. That's not in the plan, but is a potential option.
Yes, you can.
Mhm. I think that would be a fantastic idea to have, especially on the entrance on Lanita. Generally, I believe we could find some messaging there. If anybody's struggling with messaging, we could put citywide speed limit is 20 miles per hour. But then when the farmers market's in session, we could put that messaging there. If there's a special event, if there's something going on with king tides. So I believe we could definitely use that for a variety of uses. I know we have some portable ones, but if we had one installed there permanently, I think that's a great idea.
In fact, I got an email last night from Frank Squillo, who was suggesting a reader board too, because he wants people to know about Riverbend Players and other events.
Go figure. How would signage up near City Hall? I don't know what the current plan is for signage for City Hall and whether that meshes well with what you're talking about, Nan.
Could I ask a question that's related to that, but from a different angle? So, not losing your thought, Tom. So it's all going to be new up there. The building, the landscaping, everything. I would strongly prefer to not add anything on from this other angle until we get the building finished and we're in it and we see what it looks like and we see what it feels like. And I'm wondering, Nan, is there a possibility to come back for another round or a small supplemental round later once we know more and have got a sense of the feel of it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would, I look at it a little differently than Brad maybe or other folks. I'm not a fan of those electronic signs. I think they serve a really important purpose. Most of them, just be direct, I think they look kind of cheap and it's kind of just not in the feel of the town. I think it's important that we use them for safety purposes, which has been a lot, a fair amount of what we've done, or if there's some major event, but I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily be a fan of, at least at this point, we're not have to decide everything about all this right now, but I'm not in agreement yet that we'd want something permanent. And the feel of coming into Manzanita is different than Rockaway. And I'm not sure, I'm just, this is a workshop, right? So we'll just say how we're looking at things and the feel of things, but I'm not sure promoting events and stuff like that on a board like that is maybe the best route to go for this town. That's my thought. It's not binding, certainly. It's just, it's my opinion. So, but let me get a read though. Would you all be, because I think it's a really interesting question about the city hall and what information we might want people to have there regarding public meetings. Would everybody be just generally okay with putting a pause on that, knowing we can come back and ask for Nan's help once we're in the building and it's finished and we've got a feel for it? Would that be amenable to folks?
This is for the signage at City Hall you're speaking of?
Yeah, any additional signage or electronic boards, whatever, at the city hall. Yeah, that's what I'm referring to.
I would be amenable to that, and even for the electronic sign, later in the interim, we have the portable ones that we could pull out if need be, so.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Catherine.
The safety thing is the only thing that ever hangs me back. Like every time I drive by the 101 and I see the fire station and they're like sneaker waves, those signs, those are super important.
Yeah.
And if anybody is coming from another direction, and from the other direction and turns into our town, they're not seeing that signage. And we don't have anything quite like that that's as visual and as compelling as that fire station sign is. So maybe that's kind of an aspect we could look at in a round two or next round of this.
Yeah, we did. We actually paid for that fire sign that at the fire district. We did. That was one of our first electronic signs.
Yeah, and I think it's effective there.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, yeah. So what else, Nan and or Layla, what else do you need from us? And then do you want to talk about next steps? The inevitable next steps part of the discussion?
Sure. What I'll do is I'll have a meeting with partners in design and give them feedback. And their next step would be to actually just kind of design in more detail the signs. And that gives you something to look at and give feedback on as well.
Okay,
I have a question. I'm sorry to bring this up at the very end, but the signage in Wheeler, when I look at it, I think it looks very similar to the logo that we developed for Manzanita.
Yeah.
Do you have a goal of having some kind of continuity throughout the county, or how is it that we distinguish ourselves separately?
Yeah, in fact, that logo in Wheeler, the town asked the fellow who owns what's that, something in Piper? What is that?
Pelican and Piper.
Yeah, Pelican Pipe. He designed it and he had several different versions and they chose that. Their original logo was very similar to several different logos here, including Nehalem's and Pacific Cities, which was a boat on the water, and they all looked alike. So Wheeler opted for a different take on their marina, and that's what that is. It shows a boat in the bay with the marina, and it looks a little similar, but yours is pretty distinctive, really, especially with Neoconi Mountain in the back.
Right. The color palette is kind of the same, in my estimation, though.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just curious, were you striving for continuity is what I wanted to know.
Usually not with the logo. We aren't. I think every town should have their own logo, the one that they want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
It's really the structure and the way things are built and how they're mounted and the wood they use, the materials that are the similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I think the other thing that may make them look more alike now is simply that they're sizable and they've
Yeah.
gone in all relatively recently, relatively being a relative term here, but relatively recently. And so, yeah, I'd had the same question myself. Okay, Layla, anything else you need from your spot on this?
I don't think so. I'll post the plan and the kind of map which is also in the plan we'll get that posted on the website and I'll share with all of you. And I think if you do have any additional comments or things that come up, you let it sunk in for a little bit, maybe you can send those to Cody and he can compile them and then send them to Nan. So maybe by next Friday, that's reasonable. And then we can provide that feedback and then get the second round of stuff from Nan. So I think if you have comments about the materiality, any of the wording on the signage, just share those comments with us and we'll make sure we get those to Nan.
Right. Yeah, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Nan,
Thanks,
thank you
Nan.
very much. Thanks for the steady moving forward, there's pauses, but then there's, just the movement forward. So thank you for the investment in this and for getting the work begun with the county originally. So appreciate that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Take
Nan.
care.
Thanks, Nan.
Bye-bye.
Okay, now we're going to move to the short-term rental portion of the meeting. So as you well recall, when we were last together talking about this, we walked through a series of options that the committee has been working on, the short-term rental committee, and also further discussion we've had as a council and a number of forums. So I've got, I'd like to check in for feedback on this for the session for this topic before we start. But my thought was to just kind of take us through, like I did last time, the decisions, the proposals that have been made, the decisions, and just find out if there's any additional discussion people want to have on those things today. We were pretty thorough on on all three, the growth control policy options, the density and proximity, and the occupancy. There were a few nuances that we can go through where we were like, well, we hadn't really thought about that, and but anyway, I was just planning to be pretty logical and just go through them and see what else anybody might need today. Does that sound okay as just a simple way to approach this?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, we do have folks from the committee here today as well. So thank you for being here. So on the growth control policy options, we talked about of the percentage, basically leave it as it is at 17.5%. We talked about a fixed number ceiling and a limit to that number. And then we talked about an incremental growth option, STR licenses increasing by 2 per year. We were pretty thorough on that, had a good lengthy discussion, and we also had just got a read or poll on where counselors were on that in our last meeting. So we'll come to the revenue thing in a minute. Layla, I'm thinking we'll go through this whole thing and then we'll have you talk through some revenue implications. Does that work, or would you prefer
Yeah.
to? Okay.
However you want to do it.
Okay, so does anybody from counselor have the need or want to have any further discussion about the overall growth control options today?
Yeah.
I see two things. So Brad spoke and then Tom raised his hand. So Brad?
I think we need to get into some of the more details that Cody compiled for us. I feel like we had a thorough discussion on the 3 options, but I believe we should maybe get a read on should this policy apply to the commercial district and then the prioritization of a commercial license versus an individual license.
Yes, agreed. So hold that thought. We will come back to that. Tom, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did. So my thinking has changed a little bit since the last time we met.
Okay,
And one of the things that I said, I don't remember which meeting it was, but I said, you know, if there's somebody in favor of increasing the number, I haven't heard them yet. And because I was pretty well stuck on option 2 as a fixed number ceiling. And I've heard 3 voices pop up. One telling me that this person felt that we should be back at the 17.5. That person was a person that's involved in the marketing of short-term rental properties. I was a little surprised at that response. We also received a letter from a real estate agent who described our current STR cap as being overly restrictive, and brought to our attention that some people are buying with the hope that they're going to be able to go straight into STR land. You know, that's part of their buying equation. So I've heard a couple of voices that are telling me that they want to see more. I've also had some other thoughts about whether staying at a fixed number is overly restrictive with respect to growth of TLT revenue. And so my view has gone to option 3, to add 2 per year so that there's not a huge amount of growth. I think it accommodates the viewpoints of full-time residents who think that there's too much tourism in the city to begin with. And I'm not going to get into that whole topic right now, but
yeah,
I think that's a good compromise area. And then, yes, just like Brad, I'd like to talk about some of these other things separately.
okay. Jerry,
My thinking hasn't changed at all since our last discussion, but the one thing I think would be helpful would be if we could have some numbers on what our waiting lists has looked like throughout the period of the freeze. And, you know, I think we talk a lot about the demand for night stays from the perspective of the potential visitor. We don't really know what that demand is, or if we're meeting that demand, or if there's more demand out there. There's also the question of, is there a demand for more STRs? Sounds like Tom has talked to some people who would say yes, but you know, if we don't have a long waiting list, or if we have a waiting list that turns over pretty quickly, that would be informative. So I'd like a little bit more information on that, and I think I have.
Jump in and share some information if that's helpful. So we started tracking the wait list in January 2023, so just about 6 months after the freeze went into effect. And the wait list really ranged between 0 to 7. Sorry, 0 to 6, just sort of depended, and we tracked it by month. So for example, in January of 2023, there was 1 person on the waiting list. In June of 2024, there were 6. So it fluctuated. And then throughout that time, we also had between 1 and 9 people applying and trying to get inspections as licenses were turning over. So hopefully that's helpful.
Do we have any sense of how long people sit on a waiting list, or if they're discouraged and they just jump off the list and give up, or?
Yeah, my response would be anecdotal, probably. So I'll
We do
I
that
can't
sometimes.
speak for
We do
why
that
they would jump off.
No,
I'm sure
no.
that
I was
happens,
going to
but
say we use anecdotal evidence.
yeah. But yeah, I'm sure that happens because the way I look at it is like, oh, we have a wait list and then there's none, and then there's another big wait list and then there's none. So
Yeah,
take
it's
that
hard to decipher too, like how
what you
firm is
will.
somebody's
There's so
intention.
many
I mean,
reasons why that could be.
yeah, okay, but it's something. It's
Uh-huh.
something.
Yeah.
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 Should we
But,
go? Sorry, yes?
I just wanted to say now with that wait list information on the number of people applying, it to me appears that there is a demand for more than we have available. I think the 17, I know I talked about this in our last workshop, 17 and a half is what most of the citizens were against. And I think putting a fixed number in could potentially limit our revenue, which we depend on so much from the rentals. So I'm still with Tom on option 3.
Okay, would now be a good time to go through the detail about the residential versus commercial zone? Okay, well, let me come back to that. So, so related to any of these options, the cap of 17.5%, the fixed ceiling, or the increase by 2 per year, should the policy include the commercial zone districts or only apply to the residential districts? And that's the first question. And then the second question is, if the policy is applied citywide, it's contingent. So if the policy is applied citywide, would we prioritize someone in the commercial zone over the residential zone? In other words, have them jump the line, giving preference to an additional permit being given in a commercial zone rather than in the residential. So let's go back to the first question, which it came up because this came up when the freeze. Not all of us were on council at that point, but that's what came up during the freeze. Should the commercial zone activity be allowed without, should it have a freeze on it or not? And council went through that at that time. So what are people's opinions or thoughts at this point about the limits, whatever we decide on as a policy? Should they be more open in the commercial zone where businesses and business related activity are expected and should be the norm? Could somebody get us started on that?
The shy guy will talk. So,
Ooh.
I'm starting to get the sense that having differentiations between the commercial zone and the residential zone create big headaches for staff. And that's the last thing I want to do is create more work for staff that already has a lot on their plate to begin with. So while I believe that the policy should apply citywide, I have heard a couple of people telling me about frustrations of people who have been on the waiting list that got jumped in line by people in the commercial district, and it created bad feelings. I personally would love to congregate them all in the commercial district and keep them out of the neighborhoods. But the fairness side of things says to me, if I'm on the waiting list for a year and somebody just buys a house that happens to be in the commercial zone and wants to turn it into a STR, they shouldn't get priority over me. So, I've also changed my mind on that. I think that no cuts is the way to go.
Okay, and Layla's responding. She did non-verbally while you were talking, but we'll give her a chance to say it now too. Go ahead, Layla.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, I first thank you, Tom, for your consideration of how this impacts staff. I just wanted to clarify that the way that both the zoning ordinance and 1003 is written, that the commercial zone is exempt from the cap. And so staff's always administered the program in that way. It was a point of discussion that was mentioned when we put the initial freeze in place. The commercial zones were removed from that because they've always been allowed by right. And so there was some concern about a potential of takings, of that being considered a taking, since that was already always allowed. So it's actually fairly straightforward for us to issue permits. And I think that so folks don't have to go on a waiting list in order to get issued a permit. And some of the slides I put together, I separated out the capped permits from the commercial permits, because we have seen some growth in commercial permits. So I just want to make sure we were all operating from the same page. I could understand how someone in the public might be disappointed because someone else in a commercial district got a permit while they're still on a wait list. They're on that wait list because they are in the capped zones. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
So this question about commercial zone being prioritized is really not a non-issue then?
Well, so just from an administrative standpoint, I don't think it's complex, but if I may, I would agree with the concern. So we're the ones that have to interface with people who are applying for permits. And yeah, there's potential that someone could be on the waiting list for 6 months and a license comes open, and the day before somebody comes in the commercial district and we have to issue that license to the commercial district. I don't envy the folks that have to make that call. I think that there's, I personally have some concerns about sort of the fairness in that approach.
So I'm not sure where we are with this one now.
We've got the two options. Does this apply to the commercial district? Yes or no? And then if it does the commercial district have priority? I think today, because the commercial district is not currently restricted under the cap, this priority does not come into play. So you've got private licenses, I assume. Those are for private people applying. In commercial, there is no cap. So anybody that's commercial can get a license. From what I've heard and people I've talked to, I think people are concerned about the number of licenses and want them a bit more slower growth, as in option 3 versus the 17.5%. But that one's I'm still on the fence a bit about, because we depend so much on that revenue that if we include the commercial district, we're going to be restricting them from getting licenses if they're all issued. And from a citizen, myself included, point of view, I would rather see the density of short-term rentals in the commercial zone versus the residential zone.
Go ahead, Layla.
Yeah, sorry to keep jumping in here. I wonder, Mayor, if just based on the sort of conversation that's happening, it might be helpful to see some of the data I've pulled together, because I think that might help
Want
inform
to do that now?
your discussion.
Fine.
Would that be okay? And then we can come back to it. I just feel like from what I'm hearing, I think maybe some of this information might be valuable for you guys as you deliberate this. So just thank you. Appreciate that. I'll put my glasses back on now because I can't see. Okay. All right. Do you see the full screen of the
Yes.
presentation? Okay.
Yeah.
So I put together just a few points here, and I wanted to highlight kind of my data source. So I rely a lot on these monthly staff reports that I get, and unfortunately, we really don't have anything prior to 2020 in terms of these types of staff reports for some just structural reasons. They were saved locally on a desktop that is infected, I guess is the best word I can use to describe it. But it is, to me, the most accurate form of data we have, because this is something that staff puts together every month that I get to look at and was done previously. So I just wanted to show kind of what the number of STRs in the capped zones were, and I've used the December staff report for that calendar year. With the exception of 2020, the only staff report that we could pull off of this source was for August. But it gives you a good sense of how many permits for the capped zones were in place. And I do want to note that this does include some that were grandfathered into the SRR zone, which came in as part of the cap later. So I want to show, this is what I wanted to talk about, which is this STRs in the non-capped zones. So this is the L1, LC and the C1. So limited commercial and commercial zones. So in 2020, there were 26, went down a little bit in 2021, and then they've increased to 2 per year. So the cap went into place, as everyone remembers, in April of 2022. So we have seen an increase in STR, short-term rentals in the commercial zone, about 2 per year. This just gives you a sense of the total short-term rentals. I think that dip, and I'll talk a little bit about that, in 2023, we increased the short-term rental fee. So we did see some turnover that year, but those permits were obviously, again, just sort of absorbed by folks on the wait list, took up most of those. So that line probably, you can probably see it as more of a straight line.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what I wanted to talk about too. It's just the growth in revenue from transient lodging tax, and that does include hotels. We can't really separate those out, but we only have a handful of those. So the majority of revenue is generated through the short-term rentals. Fiscal year 20, which also included COVID and a shutdown of STRs, we still got pretty decent revenue. And that revenue increased to 2022. And since 2022, we have seen a decrease. I just want to remind you, we also saw 2 permits per year being issued during that same time frame. Another way of looking at it is the change in general fund. And this is just general fund. I didn't do the restricted funds, but you would see the same pattern. It just shows kind of the year-over-year change. So in 2020, we brought in $35,333 more than the previous year. Fiscal year 21, $240,000, and so on. But you can see between fiscal years 22 and 23, we dropped. And it looks really like stark here, but it was really a difference of $40,000 between.
Yeah, it's stable, basically.
Yeah, so it's dropped, but it's continuing to trend down. At the same time, we've been issuing 2 permits per year. So again, I don't know what just happened here. Okay. And in terms of percentage, we saw a huge growth, and then we're now starting to see about a 2% drop per year. And we'll have our final, we'll have 3rd quarter returns. We'll know in April what our returns are for this year. We're trending pretty close to last year. So my guess is we'll be the same or slightly below where we were the year before. And so just a couple of brief takeaways just for your, as I study this is, we saw a major shift in transient lodging tax in COVID. And there's a lot of factors that could contribute to that. Higher occupancy, obviously, higher prices and other factors. We did see an increase of 4 STRs between 21 and 22. It was prior to the freeze, which was one of the biggest jumps that we have seen historically. I think your STR committee in the report showed was about 2 per year before that. And that was just, we had a huge increase in housing construction. There was, again, that decrease that we saw in 2022, 23 was likely turnover to that. That's actually 23, increase in the licensing fee. And then we pretty much remained at or below that. I mean, obviously we're going to stay at the cap, but we've stayed even lower than the cap. So we've had available permits in the cap zones throughout the time that we've been capped. But the growth in the uncapped zones has increased 2 per year since Resolution 2205 was adopted, and revenue has declined. Not significantly, but it has declined. So I think, hopefully that's helpful for you as you kind of continue to talk about what's happening. But just to show that, you know, even with 2 per year, we are starting to see a decline in revenue. And I would more consider it a plateau at this point. So yeah, for what it's worth.
Jerry?
So I think that was extremely helpful in several ways. As I understood the numbers, during the freeze did not reduce by legislation the number of STRs in the cap zone. It just locked in the number at the number that existed when the freeze went into place. There apparently has been some attrition, and there has not been a strong enough demand from the would-be STR owner community to get up to the frozen level in the cap zone. The growth has been in the commercial zone, and maybe that's where we should promote it. And I think the other thing that is real important to remember is that the growth in the commercial zone has not resulted in an increase in revenue. It's not, I don't know what to attribute the slight decline in revenue to, but you cannot attribute it to the lack of growth in STRs, at least in the commercial zone. And the non-growth in the cap zone is not of our doing. It's the market telling us that we probably are saturated in the cap zones. There's the 228 that are there now is probably about what I just don't know whether we can add 2 a year. If we do it in the commercial zone, that will track the reality of the last couple of years. Now, that's not going to go on forever. If you add 2 a year for 20 years, it's going to change things significantly. But I just don't, I think we're all concerned about the revenue, but adding STRs as we have over the last couple of years in the commercial zone has not resulted in increased revenue. I think Layla is right that what's increasing the revenue, or at least keeping the revenue at the high level it's at, is probably more year-round use and maybe higher prices during the summer. So anyway, I appreciate the numbers. It's hard to look at them and not and make lasting decisions based on them without having more time to study. But I think that's the beauty of what we're talking about here. We don't have to lock ourselves into anything. So we got locked into something in the early 90s, and it just became religion around here. 17.5. Nobody could explain it. Nobody understood where it came from. Nobody really had any science behind it. But we locked into it. It was good, and everybody was happy with it until they weren't happy with it. Now that we're trying to take a different approach on a cap, I just think once again, we have an opportunity to really, really understand what we're doing and look at the data that should direct us. So from my perspective, I don't think we should tell the market what to do in the uncapped in the capped zone. The market has already told us that. In the uncapped zone, there's apparently some appetite for more growth, and there also seems to be more willingness in the community to have the growth occur in that zone. So I guess I'm looking for an opportunity to satisfy both the desires of the community to have less STRs in the residential areas, more in the commercial areas, and to follow the market trends to show us where the demand is and hopefully where at least being able to sustain, if not increase, the revenue is.
If I could just clarify too, one point, looking at the data with respect to the wait list and the available licenses, there were a number of months, particularly in 2024, where we had 1, 3, 5, 6, 6, 6, 6, 6 folks on the wait list and 0 available licenses in the capped zone. And just for perspective, the available permits would have increased, I think, by about 6 over the last 3 years.
2 per year. It's kind of that magic number we keep coming
Right.
back to. Yeah.
Yeah, so 17.5% in April, just a straight up analysis of that was 236. But we limited it to what we were using at the time, so I think it was 230. And based on the number of housing units in the capped zones now, that number would be 240. So there were times where there was more demand than there was availability. But there is a pretty healthy turnover at times as well.
When we froze the cap, what were the number of STRs in the cap zones?
I believe it was 235.
Right. I think,
Yeah, and a
That was the
handful
number you
of
showed
those
me, 21,
were
yeah.
grandfathered in.
So if it's 228 now,
Well, I think we're actually, as of today, I think let me look at the March report. Because again, I pulled December, so I had the same
right.
Denominator every time. Let me find. So we are fully booked out right now. So we have 5 STRs, 5 people on the waiting list and 231 in the capped zones.
So is 231 the number that we froze at?
We froze it at 230 because we had 5 that were grandfathered in above that. 1 was a duplex and then 4 were in the SRR zone. So as I think those licenses have turned over, we have not issued new permits to replace those permits.
Okay.
But it shifts, right? Like it happens pretty quickly. I mean, December is, yeah, we had 228 and then now we have 231 and 5 people on the waiting list. And it could have been that was because they were going through we have a pretty rigorous inspection process before we issue permits to folks.
That data sort of leads me to, if we had not done a freeze and gone with 2 per year, we would be aligned with the demand.
Okay. So I'm wondering where this leads us for the conversation then going forward today. I don't particularly want to go through another roll call on the growth thing. I mean, we've on the question of which growth option, but if that's useful to the group, we can certainly do that. We've gone a, which is okay, we've gone afield from the question about whether there should be a difference in how we treat, well, excuse me, Layla has confirmed for us there is indeed a difference in how we treat the commercial district in terms of what's permitted there. So, well, maybe let's just try it again. And I'm sorry Linda's not with us today, but should we take, so based on the information and the discussion we've just had, let's just kind of do another around and see where we're at with the question of growth. Can we do that without getting too deep into the weeds about the commercial district versus the non-commercial district? To just say which of the three options you're favoring? Can we do that? Okay, Brad, let's start with you.
Option 3, 2 per year.
Okay, Jerry?
I would go with option 2.
Fixed
I'm not-
ceiling?
Yeah. I'll since we're only dealing with the 3 options and no hybrids, I'll stay with that.
If hybrids serve us, that'd be great, but they may
No,
not.
that's okay. No, I think what you're doing makes sense. The one thing I do want to interject at some point, because I think, and Layla can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what happened at the point of the freeze is the city attorney provided an opinion that supported a citywide freeze, and that was the staff recommendation to council, and it was council, some members of council that were persuaded by a couple of people building property in the commercial zone at the time to adjust the proposal for the freeze to not include the commercial zone. So the commercial zone certainly was uncapped before the freeze. I think we were on track to freeze citywide, and there was a somewhat late change of heart on council that exempted the commercial zone. So that's just back history. Maybe I got it wrong, but we can figure that out when we get to that issue. But on the simple question of 1, 2, or 3, my vote would be 2.
Okay, Tom? Sorry, Tom,
You're
you're
on
muted.
mute.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, I've been a convert from option 2 to option 3 because I thought that there wasn't any demand to continue to add. But I'm hearing some people that say that they are experiencing frustration about not being able to get licenses. So I'm in option 3 right now.
Okay, the 2 per year.
Yeah.
And that's where I am also. For what it's worth, I haven't really wavered. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing on this.
Well,
but-
last time you were opening with 17.5, Catherine. So, you know, you've been open to persuasion.
True, that's true. Yeah. Okay. All right. So how do we want to state then the question about I'd like it restated because we've gone through a couple of iterations of this. So what would do we want to include the commercial zone in the overall cap? The overall cap or growth regulator, whatever you want to call it, or should it be exempt from that cap?
Well, what I heard Layla say was that it's not difficult for staff to be able to look at whether or not you're in the commercial district or in some other district and be able to apply no cap to the commercial district and apply the cap to the rest of the city. And as long as that's not a problem, then I don't think there should be a cap in the commercial zone.
Okay, Jerry, where are you on that?
Well, because I would like to see future SPRs land in the commercial zone, I guess the simplest way to encourage that is to just not cap the commercial zone. But I, again, would point out that in the numbers that Layla showed us, I believe the growth in the commercial zone during the period of the freeze has been from 24 to 32. So that's pretty healthy growth. If you're worried about, if you think, as I don't, that the way to get more revenue is to have more STRs, then you're going to get them in a commercial zone because the market is telling us that's where they want to build. And that's where the community seems to want them. A sizable number of people in the community seems to want them. That's where I would want them if I owned a restaurant on Lanita. It just makes sense. So if the easiest way to get it to happen is to leave the commercial zone uncapped, that works with me. But I honestly think that that's where the growth should be, and I don't think we need to mandate 2 a year for that to happen. I think we let it happen.
You've already made your statement about the fixed ceiling, so now you're a little in repetition zone, if you don't mind my saying. So you're
right.
okay with leaving it open in the commercial zone, and that would be in conjunction with the cap, excuse me, the fixed ceiling in the residential zone. So those two things
Yeah,
will work together
yeah.
based on what you just said. Okay, good.
I just want to jump in there because Jerry used the term mandate. And to my understanding, it would be making available as opposed to mandating that there are going to be 2 more per year.
Right, we can't mandate it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
You can't mandate that people are going to rent those nights either.
That's
So,
right.
okay.
Yeah, we have very limited powers here. Brad, what say you?
I agree with the exemption not to include the commercial zone.
Okay. And I'm there too.
Okay.
Okay. I'm torn here. Do we need a comment from a committee member? We were trying to stay focused with the council and staff on this one. So is there I'll allow it if you want to go ahead. I see a hand raised. Is it really raised?
Yeah, it is really raised. I just want to make sure that you are making the decision that you want to make about the commercial zone, in that R4 is currently not capped, but yet is not in the commercial zone. So you need to, there are only 6 STRs in the C1 and LC1 zones. All the rest are in R4. So your question, when you decide on the issue, it needs to be, do we continue to exclude R4 from the cap, or is R4 become part of the residential zones, which it is? Is that clear what I'm trying to say? In other words, you keep talking about commercial zones. R4 is not a commercial zone and yet is not capped. That was the way it was set up. So when you say not include the commercial zone in the overall number, do you mean R4, or do you only mean C1 and LC?
So Layla, thank you, Joe. So the numbers that you gave us for the commercial area, did that include the R4?
It did, yeah, and thanks, Joe, for clarifying that it's the uncapped zones, and I think we're conflating commercial with uncapped, and so the uncapped zone does include the R4. And just to further complicate things for you, but I do think it's important that you consider this is that as part of the housing code update, that Planning Commission just saw the first set of recommendations was actually consolidation of all residential zones, including the R4. So I want to be sure that as you're thinking about this, knowing that our zoning map is very likely going to change over the next 6 months, frankly. So it's a bit complicated in that respect, but the R4 does include the majority of those permits in the uncapped zone. And the LC and the C1 have very limited redevelopment potential or development potential as well.
So if we do, there's just no getting around the complexity of this. It's frustrating, but it's just how it is, and we have to deal with it. So then in future, with the way that the coding or the the zoning for the city would go, the R4 basically is meaningless, and anything that we would decide here or we need to redecide in future, if we do it by zoning, we basically have a small commercial area, which is the C1 and LC, which is kind of traditional Anita with a little bit of overflow off of that, right?
Correct.
That would be it. And what you're saying and what we're clarifying is that the growth that we've seen as we've been talking about these numbers in terms of commercial, actually, most of that growth was coming from R4, which would be part of just one zone for everything. And we won't be able to make that distinction a handful of months from now if the zoning goes that way.
That's right. And it'll likely be 2 zones, but there will be a consolidation of that. It's easy enough to use the existing uncapped zone area and create kind of an overlay. But, that's something that you can discuss. So if you want to talk about it in the context of maintaining permits in the uncapped zones, those boundaries currently exist. We can establish those boundaries as being the uncapped zone area and have it be.
But that seems we're just then creating another level of complexity again to have to maintain and explain to people, and it's confusing and it's not zoned that way now, and yet you're telling me it used to be.
It's a right, we're at a complex time because we're also about to really change the way that zoning is done for residential housing citywide, right? The R4 was probably originally included because it was considered higher density. That density is now going to apply citywide. So it's just different. Sorry about that confusion. I should have been more clear.
So, okay. So I'm taking a step back.
Do you pull up a zone map? Is that possible? Do you have that handy?
Yeah, I'll try.
I've seen one before. I know it's somewhere.
I would keep talking about other stuff while I do this if I were you.
Well, except that I've got questions for you.
You can multitask.
Let's stay focused on getting the map. We can.
Yeah.
It's fine.
This is why we need GIS. You might just need to pull it up in GIS. So, time. and it's not updated with the recent zone change that we had. SRR.
That's fine. That's not going to be. I think, Brad, you're just wanting to get a visual of how many blocks of the city are in that zone. I'm assuming that's why you're asking and kind of where they,
Correct.
yeah, thanks.
Yes.
And its overall proximity to the rest of the commercial zone.
Yeah, it's just adjacent to it. It's
Right.
it's one of those, I will talk while Layla's bringing that up. It's one of those things that's just an oddity when you come into it and you weren't part of it. You think, well, why do we even do this? But it was, it made sense to people at some point in time to have this slightly more dense, but when you look at our overall footprint, it's never made sense to me. But anyway, it's there for now
Oh.
anyway.
Well, when you see how things have developed off of Lanita over the course of the years, you have a street like Locust that used to be all vacation cabins, those houses that got blown away in the tornado and had no foundation other than some cinder blocks beneath them, were clearly built for high occupancy areas right off of Lanita to accommodate tourism. And there's few neighborhoods that are kind of like that. So, I can imagine a reason for that, because, in our heritage, Manzanita was always considered to be a tourist destination.
Well, yeah, I mean, and let's not open that can of worms right now too, on top of this.
But, we ask,
yeah.
why would that zone be there? It's because historically that's what it was looked upon as.
Well, okay, let's not, shall we move on without the map? I'm mindful of the time also.
Yeah, right.
I'll
Okay.
keep working away. They
Well, so-
upgraded the system and it doesn't recognize all my old maps, so it's a little.
Okay, well, let's just kind of pull back and see what common sense tells us based on this last 10 minutes. And the question is more really, does that change how we think about what we would recommend for a growth option or not? So,
Not for me.
okay, let me try and just restate it though, because we talked about, well, the 3 of the 4 people it's not a vote, 3 of the 4 people on the call right now are leaning towards the option that we basically add 2 a year, moving away from the percentage of the housing stock as a method. And embedded in that then was an assumption which we've had to think about differently now, that some of the growth that we would have seen in short-term rentals would have come from would have come from a commercial district that we thought included, in the numbers that won't be in there now. So the growth numbers that we looked at in the commercial district could potentially be less in the future because that part of the land that's now part of the neighborhoods that are now R4 will be shifted into just the one designation we have for residential now. So it means that more properties will be under a cap than would have been if the R4 had stayed. I sure to hope I got that right, because this is kind of thrown me for a little bit of a loop, to be honest. So, okay, so I don't know if this will.
So this is old and it's horrible looking, but the R4, so basically the R4 are the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the commercial district. So it's very hard to see. I was trying to find the beautiful map I made that had all these colors, but
We can
this
work with this.
boundary
Yeah.
line here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is the R4. This here is the C1.
Mhm.
So to give you some context, this is New City Hall. And then this here on the other side of Lanita, kind of along Dorcas here is also the R4.
Yeah.
So really, it's the areas that are just a block or two off of Bonita.
And the majority of the permits issued in the non-cap zones since the freeze were R4, not C1. Is that
I
correct?
don't actually know that. I know for sure two of them were in the C1 because they were the new homes that were built near 3rd Street. And then
Behind Wild, the big ones behind
yeah,
Wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it could have been more than that. I don't have the map in front of me.
Okay,
And so that's what I was saying about the boundary. It's easy enough to draw a boundary. And once we have our GIS system up and running, which we will need if you decide to go for a proximity measure, it's very easy for us to differentiate those.
yeah, I don't know. I don't, well, how do you say this? If we think, I'm just seeing, does the logic, if the R4 as it exists today goes away, and all that housing stock then, all those homes, hate to call it housing stock, my apologies for that language, all those homes then go into a capped area. It doesn't change my position on what I think is the right thing to do for the cap, which is to do the two per year incremental. And it means that the density that could be occurring in those, and we did hear from some citizens about this, just the number of rentals in the R4 zone. It's not that, well, they'll be subject to the cap the way that everybody else, all the rest of the homes in the city are. So it gets us to a situation where more of what the average person or regular people would look at and say, what feels like a commercial zone? Well, it feels like this commercial area that Lanita is on with these few other pockets that we have. And I guess I'd rather have us keep it simple, and not carry with us some old boundary that actually doesn't probably make that much sense anymore, and just have it be an exception for purposes of short-term rental permits. So I don't know,
Would it be
Jerry, does it?
helpful? Oh, sorry. Would it be helpful to see the proposed, and again, this is proposed, nothing has been adopted, planning commission's just talking about it, but the proposed future zone districts as part of the middle housing, or
Yes.
does that just confuse things more?
No, let's just take a look at it and see. It's why it's called a workshop. It's not
Yeah.
pretty yet. We're still working, and there's
This
other
is
things in place.
Very draft. It's part of, if you miss planning commission, Monday, recommend you check it out. But this is what I was talking about when I was talking about consolidation of the zones. So the planning commission will be considering kind of consolidation of all these zones here into what we're calling middle housing 1. And then the zones indicated here on this other map as middle housing 2. This is shown here because there'll be an overlay because it has other underlying uses that are allowed that are not allowed elsewhere. There was also some discussion at planning commission of just having one zone. So, but I think this is a likely option. I just want you to be aware that the zones as they exist today are not, it's very unlikely they will exist in 6 months. So I think Mayor, the way you're talking about this makes a lot of sense because the boundaries just are not going to apply in the same way. The commercial districts will not be included, obviously, in residential zones. So those will still be separate zones.
So it still keeps me headed on the 2+, and it definitely more keeps me away from the 17.5% number, because the other thing we don't know yet, and we won't know for a while till the housing codes changed, et cetera, and we see what the market does, but we don't know what the additional housing stock's going to be, how much the increase will really be. And part of the concern that people had with keeping it at 17.5% is simply the sheer number that they feared, and I think fear is the right word for it, feared would be become short-term rentals based on another, boom or small, more than usual growth in housing here. So yeah, so I guess I'd still be on the 2+. And I'm still fine with the idea of the commercial zone being a place where you're not part of a cap. So if you show up and you have a development you want to do in the commercial zone and it's a short-term rental, you can do that. You're not subject to the cap.
I agree with you, Catherine.
Okay, I'd like to just do a quick check-in with Jerry and Tom on that.
I agree with the way you worded it, and I'm good with that.
Well, I agree in general. I obviously don't agree on adding the 2 a year, but I agree in general. However, it does seem like if we force a decision on this before the planning commission changes the zoning, we are creating more complexity and more confusion than we need to. We're not talking about waiting a year or 2 years or 3 years. If the planning commission's changes are upon us in 6 months, that lines up pretty well with the timing, I guess, of whatever it is the county is going to do on increasing the STR tax or TLT tax, and that certainly factors into, should factor into our calculation here, because so much of this is driven by revenue, and so that's going to change the revenue a little bit, and so it feels like between those two situations, both of which are going to resolve themselves in about 6-8 months, maybe we don't act now. Maybe we better understand the data. We better understand the changes that are coming from the Planning Commission. We better understand the changes that might be coming from the county, and we make a careful decision still within this calendar year, but not right now.
So, and Tom, I think, had made some points the last time we spoke about the zoning changes aside, the practical timing of, from an STR owner's perspective, of understanding and knowing what changes are, and then having that, and then Layla has talked us through the timing it would take to do it with all the processes that are involved, because it's not we'll spend a lot of time getting to what we want to do, what we want to recommend, and then have public comment, et cetera. So that's a process in and of itself. So is there anything, I still want to hit this proximity and occupancy for a minute short, I think, but is there anything else coming up then from the work that's going on housing that would affect the density and proximity measure we were looking at? Is there anything else laying for us in wait to cause us to look at that differently than we have so far?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yes, because you're going to see density increase, right? So in terms of, I think, the intention of the policy, I think it would still stand, right? So what's going to change, if I can give you some perspective, is that, like, right now we allow duplexes on every lot. with the new zoning that will go into effect, and I want to be clear, we're actually in a fast track with that. We're hoping to get a decision from Planning Commission or a recommendation so we can get to adoption in June. If we are unsuccessful in doing that, the Oregon Middle Housing rules actually start to apply immediately. So the model code applies until we adopt our own code. So whether or not we make those changes before June 30th is irrelevant. We will be either we will be required to use Oregon's model middle housing code or our own. So we're trying very hard to get this at least before you for a first reading in June and at the latest July. So I just want to give you some timing perspective that, you know, even if we waited 8 months, we still are applying the model code. Some of the changes that will be made really start to, there's kind of things that we have to do, which are, we have to allow ADUs, we have to allow triplexes, quadplexes, we have to allow townhomes on lots within all of these districts that were currently only zoned for duplexes. So if you think about it, right, that's going to expand the option for multiple housing units, both within existing buildings. So someone could elect to turn their single family home into a triplex if it meets certain requirements, to vacant lots. And so that means that I think, and I haven't had a chance to really process this fully, but you would just have more housing units within that same, what do they call it, halo or whatever, the same boundary. There's potential for you to have a lot more housing units in there. So if your intention and your goal is to limit the number of STRs within that, I think the intention of that proximity doesn't necessarily change. In fact, maybe it becomes more important because your potential of having even more housing units within that boundary is greater once the new housing rules go into effect on July 1. So hopefully that's helpful. I think, and just to maybe hopefully help get you to a little further along is, I think you can get to a decision about this, especially since I've heard, at least from the four of you, that you exclude the commercial districts. You can still sort of direct staff on a policy, because we actually have quite a few questions that we have to get answered from legal, right? Because you have current rights that are allowed in now the R4 that would be taken away. So we would want to get some feedback on that from legal. So there's some things that can be happening concurrently to the Planning Commission's work on adopting a code, a new ordinance. And when Tom has his way, it will be a code for the zoning. Does that make sense? So I think you can, just knowing, and that's why I wanted you to see that the map, it's really just kind of throwing out the boundaries that exist right now with respect to anything zoned residential or SRR. But the commercial and the LC will stay the same throughout that. So I think you can get to that citywide decision, because we have probably a couple months of work to do just on the back end once we get your recommendation of next steps to have full legal review and determine kind of what those next steps are. And that's going to entail some additional conversations at the same time that Planning Commission will be considering the new ordinance changes.
Okay, so that is not a decision, but that is saying if we were to adopt a policy, what would the implications be? What would the legal impact be? Are there any takings, as they use in this terminology? And what risk, if any, does the city run with that? And that would be
Yes, yeah.
being in the
Exactly.
background, right, over the next.
Yeah, so I think from a sort of an operational standpoint is you would make a policy recommendation. Staff would take that recommendation and do some additional work and then bring that information back to you to either say, yep, everything you recommended is good to go and we can start to make ordinance amendments, or if there are adjustments that need to be made, we can walk you through those. So, I think our goal is to get direction from city council on all of these, and then staff will figure out we'll work on the back end of it to make sure it all passes legal muster, and that we're, and what we need to actually do and to implement that. And then we would come back to you and share that information, and then move towards actually adopting new, regulations.
Okay, so it does seem that the R4 question needs to be examined. We're saying that, at least as we're talking today, that the no cap for commercial zone would be in what is now our C1 and LC zone, which are our two commercial zones, but not the R4. So we do need that question pursued, investigated, whatever the word is for it. I mean, we're not voting and we don't have full council here today. We see an inclination towards the +2. But is there, on that question alone, the +2 versus the fixed ceiling, do you need further, more specific direction from council, Leila, to do the background work that's necessary with legal to pursue those? Do we need to get tighter on that before you can go forward?
Well, we can look at it as, we can explore both options. So that's an option, is to say, do one or the other have any, is there any potential issues with either option, so that then we can share that information with you. And then I think if there is consensus to exclude the R4 as it currently exists in the non-capped, that would be another question that we would present and want to get feedback on. So I guess my answer is yes, I can ask both questions.
Yeah, I think we should. I mean, because we're not voting, but we've got a strong point of view about the cap. And so we'd want to make sure we're fairly looking at those two things and evaluating them.
That's very clear direction.
Okay.
Can I just get one point of clarification? It's +2 on top of what? What is the 2 added to?
That was actually something I wanted to ask, is to say, if you're only looking at the LC and the C1 as uncapped, my recommendation is you absorb all of the existing permits in the R4 into your capped zone, and then you would have.
That's your number.
You would add to that number. I think if you do anything else, that is going to be a very big problem.
So to restate that, if we took the total number of licenses now and subtracted the C1 and LC licenses, we would have our number that we're going to be adding to additional per year.
Yes.
Okay, clear.
If we take that route, it could also represent the cap.
Well, if we had a certain number, let's say that number was 250, we could say the cap's 260. Doesn't have to be specific to the number of licenses we currently have. We can.
Yes.
Although, so Jerry, when you're saying the cap, what number, what logic were you applying to that?
I don't want to be repetitive.
Sorry.
What I'm trying to come to terms with, and maybe there's a way to get there, is why do we think as a legislative body that adding 2 SCRs results in more revenue? Since we don't know the answer to that, I'm at a number that we currently are living with. We are currently living with a number that produces significant revenue, and we're going to have a revenue increase very likely because of the county's effort. So I'm just stuck at that cap. But if you're adding 2 a year to that number, I just want to know what that number is. So I like the way Brad put it. You just add up all the current STRs, subtract out the ones that are in the 2 commercial zones, and that gives you a number. And you guys want to add 2 to it every year. I get that. Okay, that's simple enough.
Okay,
I would not create a hard cap that is higher than what we currently have.
well, I always think what you think is obvious may need to be said out loud. I wouldn't have dreamed that you would be promoting a higher number, but we'd never really said that. So thanks for helping us get explicit about that. Yeah. Okay. Can we come on to the density and proximity for just a moment?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I think we had a thorough discussion on that last time. What Layla has pointed out with the discussion about housing makes me a little more inclined towards having that proximity measure in place, because it actually could be more impactful than I thought it was. The whole reason I was just not that keen on it was I just didn't think it would make that big of a difference. It would be a feel-good thing, but it wouldn't actually make much of a difference in the long run. We still don't know what the density increases are going to be as a result of housing, and I don't know. It's very easy to throw out the big examples, it's going to be a triplex, now it's going to be a fourplex. There's a very wide range of opinion, and their opinions right now about what actually might happen in terms of housing and what gets built here and what it looks like and how many housing units or living units are on a piece of property. So, but anyway, it gives me a little more of an inclination towards that. I was pretty neutral about it last time we talked. So has anything today changed for anybody they want to share, Brad?
Well, just a question would be, or a point of clarification, if the zoning changes and all of a sudden, in addition to duplexes, we can have threeplexes, ADUs, etc. Only one of those living units can be an STR.
So we don't have any policy in place that states that. I think this policy would negate that, a need for that, but you don't, there's nothing codified necessarily that states that now. People can only have one STR, so by default, if you have a fourplex, then yes, only one of those can be a short-term rental, because you're only allowed to have one license.
But
So
if
it
you
kind
have
of-
a fourplex condo or townhouse owned by 4 separate entities, technically there could be 4 STRs.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, and also to be clear too, that the zoning has to change, so it's not an if, it's a when.
We understand.
And it's not like it's gonna happen overnight and a bunch of development's gonna start happening. It just, it takes decades for those kinds of things to change over time, but.
But that clarification to me says we should have a density proximity policy in place.
Okay, has anybody else changed their mind? Anything they want to add from last time on this? Tom, Jerry, still the same? Both of you in favor of it? Okay.
And just one point to clarify, and I don't know if this would be part of the new ordinance, but I'm thinking current licenses would be grandfathered in for this proximity rule until the property sells or the license is relinquished.
That's what we discussed. Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
Agreed.
As I remember, I don't remember the specific number. There were a very few spots in town where this was already occurring, where we already had this. this was presented more as a measure for the future. So yeah, anybody in.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, that's good. Thank you. Okay. I think we were all clear on occupancy but there was a question that came up as an additional consideration. And we didn't get a read on this last time, if I remember properly. So let's see if we can get a read on it today. If the policy includes a proximity limitation, should high occupancy homes, STRs having 5 or more bedrooms, be counted as 2 when calculating? Does anybody have an opinion about that, one way or the other?
I would count it as 2.
Agree.
Can I clarify? Is it counted as 2 for the purpose of the proximity, but not for the cap?
Not for licenses.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
So you
Right.
become, if you're in the bubble, the circle that we're drawing, and there's one high occupancy STR in there, and they've got 5 or more bedrooms, that gets counted as 2 within that bubble.
Correct.
Okay,
But only one license.
one license, correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Who haven't we heard from on that? Did we hear from everybody?
Yes.
Yes.
And then a point of clarification, would we exclude the commercial zone from that policy?
Yes.
Okay, agree.
Okay. All right. I talked to somebody who had an opinion and some, strong opinions about the growth of short-term rentals, and was particularly in the R4 district, and they we had a good, chat back and forth about it, and then they went and watched the I'm reminded of this person now because they went and watched the video of the discussion, and I haven't followed up yet, but the person basically said, now I see how the sausage gets made. So I kind of feel like we're still working on sausage here. It's and thank you for bearing with me in the moments when I'm trying to make sure I have this in my head properly. If my brain was still 45, I could have moved through this a whole lot more quickly, but that's just how things are. So thanks. Layla, thank you. Joe, thank you for the clarification you made that helped us make sure we were in the right zone, so to speak, to use a pun here, regarding the commercial district. Okay. I'd like to pass, given all our other discussion today on this 4th thing about how often the policy should be reviewed by council. Is anybody going to feel slighted if we don't talk about that today? I'm certainly sure we'll be on it another time.
I had a couple of things that I wanted to,
Go ahead, Tom.
because some of the correspondence that we received, we brought up topics that had not occurred to me. So I think they're important to get on our radar. One was the prospect of issuing limited licenses for people that want to be able to hand the keys off to somebody that they know or a family member, with the understanding that they're going to be charging that person for using the premises, but don't want to have a full short-term rental license. So I don't know where that thought goes, but it also dovetailed into another thing that I heard, which was about whether or not we might be able to monitor STR use, because apparently there are some people that hold licenses, but hold them for the purpose of being able to rent the house maybe 2 or 3 months during the year, and otherwise they want to occupy it themselves. And so they're taking up a license, and the city's not getting much TLT revenue from it because they just don't have it on the market for that long. And the suggestion came to me that if we could monitor whether or not on a quarterly basis we're getting revenue from an not getting revenue from an STR, whether that might ultimately be the basis for revoking a license so that we could get a license on the market that actually is paying. So a couple of different thoughts, which tell me that there's a reason to review what we're doing regularly, because I don't think we've exhausted all the topics.
We will never exhaust all the topics.
I do want to point out though, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the term, but we can revoke a license if there's no revenue generated, but I just can't remember the period of time. It just might be longer than probably what you're thinking.
Yeah, okay.
And staff has had that conversation too.
Okay.
So I'll
Well-
get that information. I feel like it's a year, but I just don't know. I can't remember.
Okay,
But
If I was
I think-
45, I could remember, but I can't.
to your point, Tom, if we are issuing short-term rental license and with all of the ordinances and rules around that, I don't feel anyone should be able to collect revenue for their home without going through the short-term rental process, unless we get to that point that they're leasing long-term. But I just don't think it's fair that I was like, hey, my friends from Portland are coming, and I'm gonna get $500 for tonight. No.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't be able, you got to share, with the city.
Yeah,
Okay.
our rules prevent that. I will say though that these will have impacts for staff, and I'm already thinking about
Right.
that. And we'll have some suggestions for you as we go through the budget process, because I've been anticipating that change is coming and we want to be ready for that, but my staff is already at their limit, if not over. So we will have some ideas about how we can address that.
very good.
Good.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to move on to the last item, which I think will be short. We'll see. And I'm also aware that Linda is not with us. So council goals. So we had a good session and agreed basically to stay. Well, we have a number of goals that have been in play for a while now, and going forward, this is the rough suggestion for how we would frame them up. It's not written up yet, so but I wanted to get a sense from counselors that are here that this is in keeping with your desires about and our discussions about what we had about priorities. So, and this also includes some input from Layla following the session. So we'll stick the basic language about leveling up, we'll stick with that. The big things for this next year will be finishing City Hall and getting settled in with the new technology and everything a new building will mean. Also, we're going to have the municipal code work in there as a second thing for leveling up. There are always lots of things in that category, but those would be the two big ones that we would call out for this next year. The comp plan will stand alone and is likely to be with us as a priority for at least 2, if not more years, depending on how we can work through that. So the comp plan will be the next thing. That will include getting the housing code adopted, which is, as you understand, we all understand, is a very big thing. We would add Classic Street as a goal on its own, since it is a very big public project for us and a significant investment of time and resources and the state's money as well. Actually, our state taxpayers' money, that's the way I should say that, our money in some way, shape, or form that's come to us from the state for that. And then we'd add another, we'll find something to call it. I don't know if we'll call it strategic planning or not, but this is where we'll take a couple of things that are going to will require some strategy work and some longer term thinking, and get those called out. And the things we talked about were kind of a combination of the revenue diversification work, the asset management and planning for the city, which we had a good discussion about, emergency management as a third item there. So are you all comfortable with that layout? We certainly have time to revise, and I certainly can accept feedback from you in a forum other than here. If you want to send, no, it'd be better to get it here. Are you generally okay with that as our main priorities? We're not saying nothing else in the universe will get done. There is certainly a lot of other work and a lot of things going on with the city that that are required of us and need to be done, but aren't going to be called out as strategic goals. So are we okay with that in general? Brad,
Good for me.
Jerry, Tom,
Yep.
Lincoln, okay, good, great. So Layla, that's the, not exactly marching orders, but that's the framework, and we talked about this before, so that's the framework for the budget discussion as well.
Great. Would you like me to, we kind of memorialize these in a resolution so I can?
I would love for you to do that. Yes,
Great.
great.
I'll ask Cody to help me.
Great.
So we'll prepare that for April.
Okay, then the other thing for counselors not to discuss today is to consider of the strategic areas, particularly the strategy areas at the end, where you might like to play a more significant role in leadership. We've done some of that this last couple of years. It's worked out nicely. Doesn't mean you have to sign up for something, but if you've got a particular passion for it, or you'd like to play more of a role in helping the city get its policy and strategy developed, then I think that'd be great. And we can figure out how to use the talents that we have to the best effect for everybody. So, okay. All righty. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks to everybody who is here. Appreciate you joining us today. And thank you to anybody who may be watching this another time due to the advances in technology we have now, where you can watch us go through all this in a recording instead of live. But I do appreciate all the work that went into this. And I want to say again, thank you to the members of the short-term rental committee who
Absolutely.
stuck with this and are sticking with it. So as often the case, more to come. And I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. So thank you very much. I hope everybody has a nice evening.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks.
Evening. Bye.